Oh my God, Luke, I've done it.
Done what?
The thing I've been trying to do for the past 5 days. I've finally figured out how all the wrestlers in Samoa are related to each other. Right. The Bloodline, Roman Reigns, The Rock, the Usos, Solo Sikoa, they're all related, but their roots run deep underground and far back in time, supporting a much larger, ancient, very complicated family tree, which also includes the likes of Yokozuna, Rikishi, Umaga, and Rocky Johnson. They all belong to the Samoan dynasty, which is made up of 3 main families: the Anoa'i family, the Maivia family, and the Fatu family. That's why WWE's Bloodline saga is the perfect pro wrestling story. It blends the fictional clash of characters and championships with the real-life culture and tradition of the Isles of Samoa. And to truly understand it, we've got to go all the way back to the beginning. Chapter 1, Blood Beginnings. The Samoan dynasty can be traced back to one man, Fanini Laifi Peter Maivia, better known to wrestling fans as High Chief Peter Maivia. Taking living the gimmick one step further, High Chief wasn't just a wrestling nickname where you can just say something and pretend it's true, like Main Event Jey Uso or Big Penis Ollie Davis. Maivia's tattoos that covered his stomach and legs were a symbol of his actual Samoan High Chief status. We couldn't find any official confirmation on that though. We even looked up the royal family he was supposedly descended from and couldn't find any mention of him, but he is frequently referred to as royalty by articles and in interviews. Anyway, at 20 years old, Maivia decided to leave American Samoa to begin a pro wrestling career in New Zealand, and, well, he was pretty successful. He went on to become a multi-time champion in various NWA territories and the AWA, where he became close friends with superstar Billy Graham. In 1977, Maivia joined the WWF, where he would work main event programs with his friend Billy and Bob Backlund, who he'd eventually turn heel on in 1978. But Maivia wasn't just a pro wrestler. Setting a trend his grandkid would later follow, he was also an actor. He actually appears in my favourite James Bond movie ever, You Only Live Twice. That's right, I said it, you can do one, Skyfall, where he used his pro wrestling knowledge to also be the film's stunt coordinator. Look, there he is, playing a Japanese man despite not being Japanese. I'm sure that's the last time any of his Samoan relatives will be cast as a Japanese person. Maivia has actually been immortalised in the movies beyond Bond, as The Rock himself has revealed his granddad was the basis for his Maui character design in the Disney film Moana. It was while Maivia was living in California, though, that he met someone else from Samoa, a man by the name Amituanai Anoa'i, the Grand Patriarch of the Anoa'i family. The two men became so close they decided to become blood brothers, which in Samoa means far more than just bleeding with someone, otherwise Jon Moxley would be related to everyone. The underlying concept of Samoan culture is called Fa Samoa, which translates to the Samoan way. It's the traditional way of life in Samoa, and it encompasses the fundamentals of respect, family, and spirituality. But don't take it from me, here's David Tuanei, founder of the Samoan Cultural Centre.
That's still part of their identity, is the Fa Samoa. So family is a very integral part of our psyche, right? We don't survive without our family. And so we do everything that we can to care for our family, take care of these relationships and these bonds that we have.
In Samoan culture, family isn't limited to those who share DNA or come from the same bloodline. It can include adopted connections as long as they all acknowledge the matai, or head of the family. And that's what happened with Peter Maivia and Amituanai Anoa'i. When they became blood brothers, their two respective families, the Maivias and the Anoa'is, essentially adopted each other, forming one big super family. Like that time the corporation merged with the ministry. I think the Samoan dynasty had begun. In the late 70s, Maivia moved to Hawaii and purchased the NWA Polynesian Pro Wrestling territory. He passed away in 1982, aged just 45, after a battle with cancer, giving way to the next generation of Samoan wrestling.
You mean the generation where Samoa Joe's in it?
No, Luke. Samoa Joe isn't related to any of the people I'm talking about here. He's not related to anyone. Chapter 2. A rocky relationship. With Maivia's passing, his wife Leah Maivia took over running PPW, becoming one of wrestling's first female promoters. If one story about her is to be believed, she was in for quite a shock, as, despite being married to a pro wrestler, she thought wrestling was real. According to The Rock, at the beginning of Maivia's career, he never told Leah that wrestling was scripted. Apparently, when Maivia was being worked over in a match in San Francisco, Leah got so distressed, she got in the ring and tried to beat up his opponent with a wooden clog. Who throws a clog? Peter was then forced to reveal to Leah that wrestling is scripted, yelling at her to stop in Samoan because his opponent was actually his friend. While the High Chief was alive, he befriended and started a tag team with another wrestler called Rocky Johnson, a candidate for Wrestling Mustache Hall of Fame. Johnson had initially trained to be a boxer, where he sparred with Muhammad Ali and George Foreman, but became a pro wrestler in 1964. Although he was married with 2 kids, Rocky started seeing Peter Maivia's daughter, Atta, who he met while teaming with her dad. Extra confusing side note, Atta is the adopted daughter of Peter Maivia, as Leah had her in a previous relationship. Anyway, the High Chief disapproved of their romance, apparently not because of Rocky's other family, but because Rocky was a wrestler. Like him, and he knows how naughty those wrestlers can be, deciding Johnson couldn't provide a stable life for his daughter. This caused a year-long rift in the family, because of the Samoan way being based on everyone acknowledging the head of the family. Johnson and Atta eloped, an act of disrespect, and were estranged from the rest of the family until the birth of their first child in 1972, who, for now, we'll just call the Pebble. Rocky went on to become one of the most important figures in wrestling history, having NWA feuds in the 70s with the likes of Harley Race and Terry Funk, and teaming with Tony Atlas in the WWF to become the promotion's first black tag team champions in 1983. But who did they beat to win those titles? The High Chief Peter Maivia's real-life adopted nephews, Afa and Sika Anoa'i, aka the Wild Samoans. This is the OG Bloodline story. Right now we're going to go up to the Maivia side of the family, to the top there with Peter, and over to the Anoa'i side with 2 of his 6 children, Afa and Sika. As the legend goes, before Afa and Sika became wrestlers, they were part of a large group of Samoan fans who would go to wrestling shows in San Francisco. Attend being a light description of what they were doing. According to Sika himself, they were so rowdy they were approached to become wrestlers because they were too dangerous to leave as marks, which is the nice term the wrestling industry uses for fans. After wrestling in Canada and America through the 70s, mostly in NWA territories, they signed with WWF in 1989, initially as just the Samoans. Both would wrestle Bob Backlund for the WWF Championship, and they won the tag titles 3 times. And it was during this period they became backstage friends with Paul E. Dangerously. That's right. Paul Heyman has actually been associated with the Samoan dynasty for over 40 years. By the end of the 80s, this behind-the-scenes friendship would become an on-screen act, when Heyman ended up managing the Samoan SWAT team, which was made up of Afa's son Samu Anoa'i and his nephew Solafa Fatu Jr., who would go on to become the next generation of Samoan wrestling stars in the 90s.
Like Samoa Joe.
No, God damn it, Luke.
Yeah, sorry. I know you've said this before. Yeah, you're right. No, TNA was in the 2000s, so he's coming up soon.
No, he's not part of this family. How many times have I got this? Chapter 3, A Rock and a hard place. The Samoan SWAT team was signed by the WWF in 1992 and immediately underwent a pro wrestling rite of passage, getting a far less cool, slightly racist new name. No longer with Heyman as their manager, Samu's father Afa managed them in the early days until Samu left to heal from injuries, which WWF gave the storyline explanation that he wasn't coping well with Captain Lou Albano's attempts to civilize him. Fatu has since gone on the record to say he really didn't like the savage aspect of the gimmick. Fatu carried on first in a brief run as the new Head Shrinkers. Look, they've got the Barbarian now, and then a failed repackaging as a positive influence for disadvantaged youths. But the worst was yet to come, when Fatu got the disastrous new gimmick, the Sultan, which somehow lasted from 1996 to 1998, including an Intercontinental Championship match at WrestleMania 13 against some bloke called Rocky Maivia. That sounds familiar. I wonder if he's related to... Oh, it doesn't matter! I'm distracted by this being the same show where Sid himself. But the run of bad gimmicks was about to change, as in 1999 the Sultan returned under the new name Rikishi Fatu, becoming one of the most iconic mid-carders of the Attitude Era and the guy who attempted to murder Stone Cold Steve Austin. Back earlier in the 90s though, while Rikishi was still trying to find the right gimmick, another member of the Samoan dynasty was ruling the company. Another nephew and wrestling student of Afa and Sika, Rodney Anoa'i, went through a bunch of different names. The Giant Kakina, the Great Kakian, and Kakina the Samoan. He wrestled in New Japan, teaming with Vader, Owen Hart, and his real-life cousin Samu under the Samoan SWAT team name, and he signed with WWF at the same time as Samu and Rikishi, wrestling one house show as his previous gimmick Kakina before he was repackaged into his iconic character, Yokozuna, the sumo wrestler. Between 1992 and 1994, Yokozuna was one of the most prolific wrestlers in WWF, winning the 1993 Royal Rumble, main eventing WrestleMania, and becoming the first ever WWF champion of Samoan descent. They didn't say that at the time, though, because they were pretending he was Japanese. He also won the tag team titles twice, again teaming with Owen Hart. Unfortunately, Yokozuna's run in WWF was cut short, as in trying to portray the sumo wrestler character, he gained too much weight, which started to affect his in-ring work. WWF took action and sent both Yokozuna and Vader to a weight loss facility, but it didn't really work, because they would apparently sneak out at night to go eat fried chicken. They actually finished weight loss camp by gaining more weight. Concerned for his health, WWF released Yokozuna but said they'd rehire him if he could slim down to 400 pounds. He never did. Yokozuna died in the year 2000 at the age of just 34. Remember back in 1972 when Rocky Johnson eloped with Atta Maivia and High Chief Peter Maivia disapproved, estranging them all and only reconciling with them upon the birth of their child? Well, by this point, that pebble... he's all grown up. Okay, right, let's go all the way back up, hop over to the Maivia side, down 2 generations, and there we are. Rock the Dwayne Johnson. Johnson began wrestling in 1996 after his football career didn't pan out. Pat Patterson got him some WWF tryout matches after realizing he was a natural, where he wrestled under his own name and the other gimmick of Flex Kavana. Flex Kavana. Why did he not stick with that one? That's such a good name. Johnson is one of the only people in the Samoan dynasty not to be trained by Afa, Sika, or Rikishi, because he was instead being trained by his father, Rocky Johnson, and Pat Patterson. Apparently, Rocky never wanted Dwayne to follow in his footsteps, but if he was to become a wrestler, he'd be the one to train him. Johnson was fast-tracked to a WWF debut later that year as Rocky Maivia and was pushed hard. Arguably too hard, becoming the sole survivor in his debut match at Survivor Series 1996 and winning the Intercontinental Championship in early 1997, a title he would then defend at WrestleMania 13 against the Sultan, who would then become Rikishi, his second cousin. Maivia was billed as the first third-generation superstar coming after Rocky Johnson and Peter Maivia. His one-dimensional good guy character wasn't working out though, so when Rocky returned from an injury in 1998, he turned heel and debuted The Rock name. He would go on to become one of the biggest stars in professional wrestling history, becoming a multi-time world champion, main eventing WrestleMania many times over, and having arguably the most iconic WrestleMania feud in wrestling history against Stone Cold Steve Austin. In Samoan culture, The Rock also became a High Chief, being given the title Son of Malietoa, which means son of a king. He is also the real-life chief of the Suili family. Outside of wrestling though, also like his grandfather, he became an actor, where he would eventually become one of the most bankable Hollywood megastars on the planet. That took a while to happen though, as Rock had to pay his dues with the likes of the Tooth Fairy. Side note, South and Tails is brilliantly bonkers though, but that meant Rock's run at the top of the WWF only lasted about 4 years, as he started to transition into acting in 2001 with The Mummy Returns, leaving the next decade to the Anoa'i branch of the dynasty.
Where Samoa Joe comes in.
How can I distract Luke for the next 4 minutes? Hey Luke, I bet you can't name every Limp Bizkit single in chronological order.
Oh, come on, at least give me a challenge. You start with Counterfeit from $3 Bill Y'all, then you move into, which of course starts with Nookie. You'd then think it's Break Stuff, wouldn't you think it's Break Stuff? But you'd be wrong again, it's actually End Together.
It's time to bust out your frosted tips, because it's the noughties.
Then you get into
Chapter 4, the Bloodline line. We tried to put zeros for the noughties instead of the O's for the year 2000. It works better written down. Matthew Tupunu'u Anoa'i was the son of Seeker of the Wild Samoans and made his pro wrestling debut in 1995 under names like Matty Smalls and Mac Daddy Kane. Matthew trained alongside his cousin Eddie Fatu, the brother of Rikishi. They were both signed to WWF developmental contracts in 2001 and were sent to a then feeder promotion called Heartland Wrestling Association. They wrestled there under the tag team name The Island Boys. Boys spelt with a Z, because it was 2001.
Which is the correct way to spell it. And then the final single is Dad Vibes off the latest album, Still Sucks. That is every single with 0 strikes. Come on now.
The brothers were called up to the main roster in 2002, where they made their WWE debut as 3 Minute Warning. Matthew was now called Rosie, and Eddie wrestled as Jamal. Their gimmick was that they'd attack people on Eric Bischoff's request, giving them a 3 Minute Warning, which included people like D'Lo Brown, Lillian Garcia, and perhaps most infamously, 2 lesbians. Again, it was the early noughties. In 2003, though, Eddie Fatu was released from WWE when he got involved in a bar fight, but he continued to wrestle in NWA TNA and All Japan Pro Wrestling until 2005.
Where he's renamed to Samoa Joe!
No, do the Limp Bizkit thing again, but in Fred Durst's voice.
You start with Counterfeit, then you move into the next album and it's
Luke's wrong,
Nookie.
because in 2006, Fatu would return to WWE with his now iconic gimmick, Umaga. He was pushed hard, wrestling the likes of Ric Flair, Triple H, Shawn Michaels and Jeff Hardy, winning the Intercontinental Championship twice, and even being involved in one of the biggest angles the company had ever done, representing Vince McMahon against Donald Trump's Bobby Lashley in the Battle of the Billionaires. You might have thought getting released earlier in his career for a real-life fight would have made him change his ways, but during a match with jackasses Steve-O and Chris Pontius, Umaga started shooting on them because he felt they weren't selling enough. Here's Steve-O's own recollection of that night.
I felt like he was just hitting me so hard. And then the last move that we discussed happens, and then like it's supposed to be over, but he's still hitting me. And I didn't know. I didn't know that he was hitting me because I wasn't playing dead. And I didn't know I was supposed to play dead.
Meanwhile, Rosie had stayed in WWE. He became a comedy act with the Hurricane as his superhero in training, which if you spell out the initials, spells shit. They overcame the literally shit great gimmick though, getting over with the fans and winning the tag titles at Backlash 2005. But in 2006, Rosie was released from WWE because of similar concerns they had about his cousin Yokozuna a decade earlier. WWE felt he was too heavy and was becoming a danger to himself and others. In 2007, he was a contestant on the show Fat March, but didn't finish the season. Aside from sporadic appearances in All Japan through 2006 and 2007, Rosie didn't wrestle beyond his WWE tenure, instead opening a restaurant in Florida. Both Rosie and Umaga's lives were cut tragically short. In 2009, after being released from WWE due to repeated failures of the wellness policy and refusal to attend rehab, Umaga suffered a heart attack as a result of repeated drug use and passed away at the age of just 36. And in 2017, Rosie died aged 47 due to complications related to congestive heart failure, something which had been plaguing him since 2014. But in an incredibly interesting note, on the same day Umaga passed away, on December 4th, 2009, his nephews Jonathan and Joshua Fatu signed developmental contracts with WWE. But you might know them by a different name. Jimmy and Jay, the Usos. Before I talk about the Usos, this video would not be possible without the amazing support of our Patreons. This took a lot of time to research, write and edit. Shout out to Kelly, Pete. Say hi, Pete.
Hello, hi, it's me.
Luke, me, of course, Brandon and Ellis for all working on this video. If you've enjoyed it so far, please consider supporting us on Patreon yourself, while you'll get loads of exclusive video content like WrestleTalk Extra. That's where Luke and I do a deep dive into wrestling history, and survival series Thunderdome, a remote version of everyone's favourite wrestling trivia show. Go to patreon.com/WrestleTalk to check all that out. Thank you. Chapter 5, The Modern Era, Bloodline. While the Usos are the sons of Rikishi, they have credited their uncle Umaga for saving their lives. Because Rikishi was away on the road so much when they were growing up, Umaga became like a father figure to them, and it was Umaga who turned up at their home one day in Florida, having driven there all the way from Texas, where he told them to quit their jobs to become wrestlers with him in Houston. They left to start training the next day. They began wrestling in 2007, got signed to WWE in 2009, and debuted on the main roster in 2010, where they would win the tag championships 8 times, setting the longest title reign record at 622 days. Thanks to their excellent chemistry with the New Day, the two teams carried the WWE tag division for half a decade. Jimmy would also marry fellow WWE star Naomi in 2014, adding another pro wrestler into the family. But their biggest wrestling moment was yet to come, when in 2020, for the first real time in WWE history, the Samoan dynasty was directly inserted into kayfabe. After this whole video talking about the Samoan dynasty bloodline, it's finally time to talk about the bloodline and their head of the table. Laity Joseph Anoa'i is the son of Sika of the Wild Samoans and younger brother of Rosie. Despite technically being one generation above the Usos, I'm so confused. Joe Anoa'i grew up with them because they were all born 3 months apart. In fact, Jimmy and Jay were only born 9 minutes apart. What are the chances? The three did everything together, including going to high school together and playing football together. So after a few off-season stints with NFL teams in 2007 and 8, Joe decided to join his cousins in WWE in 2010. He began wrestling in FCW as Laiki, or Roman Laiki, where he once won a triple threat to fight for the promotion's top title, which he never won. His opponents in that triple threat? Dean Ambrose and Seth Rollins. When FCW rebranded to NXT in 2012, Roman Laiki was renamed to Roman Reigns. He made his main roster debut shortly after with Rollins and Ambrose as The Shield, who would go on to become arguably the greatest 3-person faction in WWE, nay, wrestling history. And then came the bad times. Just a year after The Shield broke up in 2014, Reigns had become the new trendy guy to hate. Fans resisted his mega push, which saw world title wins, WrestleMania main events, Royal Rumble victories, and a suffering Succotash promo. All it took was a global pandemic to turn things around. Roman had battled with leukemia in 2018, deeming him immunocompromised at the start of the pandemic. Despite being set for a WrestleMania 36 match against Goldberg, he instead stayed away from wrestling for half a year. During that time, he started talking to his dad's good friend, Paul Heyman, on what a totally revamped version of his character would look like. With Heyman by his side, Reigns returned to WWE at SummerSlam 2020 with a new bad guy persona, winning the Universal Championship 1 week later at Payback. And this is where the Bloodline begins. Roman began referring to himself as the Tribal Chief and the Head of the Table, names that were specifically used as long-term seeds for a match against The Rock. But before then, his first Universal title defense was against none other than his real-life cousin, Jey Uso, where, after decades of WWE ignoring their wrestlers' Samoan heritage, or sometimes just calling them Japanese, Far Samoa, the Samoan way, took center stage. Familial bonds, blood-related or otherwise, take priority in Samoan culture, and they all must acknowledge the Matai, the head of the family. And that role is a vital one for the family and community in Samoan culture. Here's David Tuane of the Samoan Cultural Center again to explain more.
There's a saying in Samoa, ole ala le pule, ole tautua. And what that means is the road to authority is through service. This idea that the greatest among us is the least, right? The greatest among us is the servant among us. It's meant to be a service mentality. So as the head of the family, right? There's many responsibilities that fall on you to be able to make sure that the family is organized and functioning properly, right? So the head of the family is the father of the family. So we call them the father of the family. And they're bestowed a title to govern or have authority to govern this particular family.
Even more than the Universal title itself, it was that role of Matai that Reigns and Jey Uso first began feuding over. Jey would take issue with Roman's new heel tactics, but Reigns would explain he had to do these things as he wasn't just providing for his own family, but for Jey's family, for Jimmy's family, for everybody in the Samoan dynasty. He was the Matai. He sees himself as a servant of the family. It's something that has fallen to him, that he didn't choose this life, which is another important facet of the character.
The way that one becomes a chief is just that. Meaning that the road to authority is through service. So individuals that display a certain amount, that serve the family, right? That put time and effort to try to keep the family going, doing the chores, all these other things, are individuals that other family members will recognize and say, hey, that's a person that has displayed that their heart is in the right place, that they're about the family and making sure that the family is taken care of, and that they're not seeking out their own glory or their own opportunities, right? Their own agenda, personal agendas.
Reigns sees the work he's done for the past 8 years, his time in the Shield, the main events, the championship feuds, all of it while being the most hated man in wrestling. That was his sacrifice. That was what he was willing to do for the family. He has earned the title of Tribal Chief. Now he just needs everyone to acknowledge him.
The way a chief is selected is by family consent. Even if it was father to son, they still present the son to the family and seek the family's consent. Traditionally, the families would seek 100% consent for this title passing from father to son.
100% consent. This completely reframes Roman's "acknowledge me" catchphrase. It's not just a couple of words to make the crowd pop, it's the entire core of his character. He is the tribal chief, but he needs everyone to acknowledge that, otherwise he has no authority. A chief without a tribe. Here's a clip from Paul Heyman's amazing interview with Rick Rubin, which I can't recommend enough, talking about acknowledgement.
He stumbles onto things. The acknowledge me was a stumble.
That's the best. It's the best.
We were trying to figure out, what does he really, because his first storyline as champion was with his cousin Jey. And Roman had said, well, you know what I really want from Jey? I don't want his love. I have that. I don't want his admiration. I don't even want his obedience. I'll take that from him. You know what I need? I'm the head of the table. I am the tribal chief. I need him to acknowledge me. And the moment he said it, we all got chills because we knew this is bigger than this moment. Yeah. This is the declarative statement. This is the definition of the character. What does the character want? What does the tribal chief need? What does the head of the table seek? Acknowledgement.
But what happens when someone in Roman's family doesn't acknowledge him? In their first match at Clash of the Champions Gold Rush in 2020, Jey Uso refused to submit. Even though Reigns beat the ever-loving piss out of him, Jey refused to bend to Reigns' will. He didn't acknowledge him. Reigns didn't get 100% consent, which is why when Roman was about to be officially crowned as the tribal chief on the next SmackDown, he refused, explaining, "This is why the rematch at Hell in a Cell 2020 was an I Quit match, because Roman needed Jey to verbally acknowledge him. But in the course of that match, Reigns realized Jey would never yield, so he weaponized the very concept of family against him, attacking Jey's then-injured brother Jimmy until Jey quit. Only then was Reigns able to walk up the stage to officially be crowned the tribal chief by Afa and Sika, the Wild Samoans, his uncle and father. 100% consent. 2 years later, at Clash at the Castle 2022, Rikishi's other son, Joseph Yokozuna Fatu, his middle name from his cousin's wrestling gimmick, would join the Bloodline faction as Solo Sikoa. And if Roman ever needs more recruits, he need look no further than his next family barbecue. Because on the independent wrestling scene, there's Afa's 3 sons, Samu, Manu, and LA Smooth, Tonga Kid's kid, Jacob Fatu. Oh yeah, I didn't even get to cover Rikishi and Umaga's older brother Samuel Fatu, who wrestled as the Samoan Savage and Tonga Kid in the 80s in WWF, where they claimed he was the cousin of Jimmy Snuka, who is not related to anyone in the dynasty, he's from Fiji, and Umaga's son Zilla Fatu, Rikishi's other son Jeremiah Fatu, Samu's son Lance Anoa'i, and Afa's nephew Shawn Maluta, who had wrestled in WWE's Cruiserweight Classic tournament. There's also The Rock's daughter Simone Johnson, who became NXT's general manager Ava Raine at just 22 years old. And what about Nia Jax, who is the daughter of Peter Maivia's cousin, meaning she's technically one generation above The Rock. Oh, and actually Jimmy Snuka is related, by marriage, having been married to Peter Maivia's niece, Sharon, which means that Jimmy Snuka's children, Tamina and Sim Snuka, or Deuce, are Peter Maivia's great niece and nephew respectively. And despite not being blood related, The Rock has gone on record to say that he considers Tonga Uli Uli Fafita, more commonly known as Haku, his uncle, and understanding that in The Rock's Samoan culture, that bond means just as much as if they were blood related, even if they're not Samoan, which means we also need to include Haku's sons Tamatonga, Tangaloa, and Hikaleo, and their cousin Bad Luck Fale. And Roman Reigns himself has 5 children, including 2 sets of twin brothers, along with Jimmy's 2 children, Jay's 2 children, Solo Sikoa's 2 children, The Rock's 2 other children. The Samoan dynasty isn't going anywhere in wrestling.
And Samoa Joe.
Oh, God damn!
Hello and welcome to Tables,
Lists,
and Chairs. Welcome back to another episode of TLC here on WrestleTalk. Thank you so much for checking out the video. If it's your first time here at TLC, here's how it goes. The three of us being me, Pete, I'm joined by Luke.
Hello.
And Sullivan.
Hello.
We're back